So we are Ryan and Allie Wall. We've been married for about 7 years, and we adopted our son Everett about 3.5 or 4 years ago.
We did not know a lot about adoption when we first started down this track, and we knew we both were open to it, but we weren't, I wouldn't say, as educated as we now are and as we would have hoped we were beforehand. And so before we didn't know a ton, and then we ended up taking this class. We ended up meeting with people who have gone through adoption. We ended up doing our own research and videos and books and things like that.
I don't know. I mean, I think the best thing for us is probably not like content driven, but just being in relationship with people and being able to ask questions about other people's experience. And so there's a couple families that we were able to ask a lot of questions to, both in kind of a formal way and go through a bunch of questions like this, but also that we can just pick up the phone and like, hey, 2 minutes, this is something I'm wrestling with. What are your thoughts? And so I think for us, being in relationship with other people that were a season ahead of us was probably the most effective thing in helping to speed up our learning curve. Yeah, so I would say both our like formal small group as well as an extended group of people that for us were a couple people who knew us really well and a couple people that we knew decently but that had gone through adoption process. And so we had a group of probably about 15 to 18 people that were around us and walked through the decision-making process, I would say, and separated if and how. And so we really spent a lot of time deciding if we should adopt and then how to do that. And our community group was really helpful in asking good questions. And so I think in our mind, we thought like, hey, here we are. We want to adopt. We're going to walk in and everyone's going to be like, of course, that sounds amazing. And there was that followed by but here are some questions that we want to ask to just discern is this best, particularly in this season. And so for us, a couple of things that they were really good about asking questions. One, we had recently had a failed placement or failed match with a mom who had decided to have an abortion. And so that was about 2 months prior to us bringing this conversation to our small group. And so they were really asking questions about, have we done the hard part of processing that, grieving, healing from the midst of that? And so I think it was some really good questions that we were processing in community, but they kind of doubled down on as we thought about this quickly moving towards another potential adoption. And then the second was that both our community as well as even kind of agency were asking questions about just the wisdom of us trying to get pregnant in the midst of considering adoption. And so at that time, we didn't know that infertility would be part of our story. And so for us, it wasn't that we totally stopped trying to get pregnant, but we definitely weren't as intentional about going and tracking rhythms and talking to doctors and other things. And so those were two questions that for us, our community group really was asking. And so we were a little bit caught off guard, I would say, with the fact that they didn't just walk in and were like cheering for us, but that they were being wise and discerning and good counselors for us. And so I think ultimately that's been a huge blessing. We were really thankful for them. At the time, we were surprised by it and didn't necessarily love it. But we were really thankful that we had folks around us that didn't just say, of course, and go, but actually were checking on both our motivations and the practicality of adoption.
Our expectations were different from how things played out. The first thing would be with the agency, and part of that goes back to education. I wish we would have been more prepared to go into an agency, almost interviewing them and having questions prepared and really digging in and you can hear reputations about agencies, but I think it's really important for you to make sure it's going to be a good partnership and make sure that expectations are really clear. And so our expectations were an agency would just take care of everything. It would make it such a breeze. You're spending all this money, so this is just going to be real easy. And come to find out, life is hard and adoption is hard. And so as much as people are trying to help you, there's going to be obstacles. And so I wish we would have done more research and preparing to who we would partner with to move forward with adoption, with an adoption agency. And then also, which we'll talk more about having an open adoption now, but our expectation going in is that we would have an open adoption and we would get to care for this mother, and it would be more about than just the child. It would be about this other family. It would be about that. And so we'll share some of that in a minute, but when it ended up starting closed, that was very different than what we were expecting. In the third part, we will also dive in a few minutes, but just the culturally, I think when you're adopting outside of your race, oftentimes in churches, people praise you and you're viewed as holier or whatever. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would take in this child and yay you. And what we found is that actually the other community, so for us, our son is Black, and that there has been, I think my eyes were open to not everyone in the Black community loves that white people are adopting Black children. And so we'll talk some about that too in a few minutes. But those were as far as expectations and things that I think we're continuing to learn and our eyes have been open to.
Yeah. And
just the emotional, the emotions that come with feeling so connected to this other mother. And I was not prepared for grieving for her. And on Mother's Day, things like that, like I was so caught off guard that I hated Mother's Day because I couldn't not think about her. And I never knew that I would feel that way. So I think the emotions of feeling so connected to someone else who has made the hardest decision of their life, really, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, and so for us, it is a continual process. Mm-hmm. I don't think that there's ever just like a bullet point or a period to that. And so we initially were really excited about the idea of an open adoption, and that was the plan and kind of our adoption plan. And then when we were in the hospital, then the birth mother decided to close the adoption, which caught us off guard. And we didn't know kind of coming out of that. And then, we get home and you're just like not sleeping and it's just kind of feels chaotic. And so I don't know that we had a whole bunch of thoughts kind of in that initial season. And then about a month into us having Everett, then he got a staph infection and was in the hospital. And she had heard about that somehow through kind of a friend of a friend. And her and really kind of some extended family for her felt like she was caught off guard by that and felt like she had a right to know that, and so started communicating to the agency some frustration about her not being communicated with about what was going on with Everett. And so that really, I would say, stirred up a lot of conflict, and particularly with the agency playing like a third-party communicator, and I don't know that they did a great job with that. But in the midst of that, then we started engaging in conversation with her again, and communicated both our desire to like hope for an open adoption and where some of the communication went wrong. And so then we started a process of both like resolving conflict around that particular issue of just communicating with him being in the hospital, but also a broader conversation about what we would hope would be openness. And we didn't exactly know what that would look like, but our desire for that. And so that began a relationship with the birth mom over time that included probably a year of us navigating what this potentially could look like and having conversations, and her seeing Everett. And then since that time, that first year was, I would say, pretty difficult, and a lot of hard conversations and a lot of expectation setting. Then we have gotten more and more open, where there's a lot more communication, more frequent, and more of a friendship relationship, as opposed to kind of a formal, I don't want to say transactional, but just more intentional time together. Now it's become much more organic in a relationship. But that's been a long period of time. It didn't happen easily, and I would say kind of ebbs and flows in different seasons, like any other relationships.
I think our heart, too, in wanting openness was what I mentioned before, that we don't view adoption as just a family getting a child, that we really want a holistic approach of how we're caring for everyone involved. And second to that is, from our research, we landed that we felt like it would be best for our son to have information, be able to ask questions. We are in a healthy place with her, and there isn't any safety concern or anything. So for him to actually get to know why he looks the way he does and why he has mannerisms the way he does, and to know he's fully loved in a way that we can say those things, but for him to get to experience it, we felt like pushing through any hard conversations or any fears or any awkwardness. If it's best to love your child, you do it. And any parent wants to do what's best for their child, regardless if there's hard things that you kind of have to walk through or awkward moments or anything like that. We want to do whatever is best for our son. And we felt like for him to know more and know more love would be beautiful, and it has been. And so we went from we like to talk about under promising and over delivering. So specifically, when we first started out, it was, hey, what can we as a family commit to regardless of life circumstances? And that looked like sending in the mail updates. The first year we did more frequently. Now it's twice a year. And then also having 2 in-person visits a year, so in the summer and in the winter. And we felt like regardless if our family grows, regardless if she moves, regardless of anything, that we would commit to until he's 18, twice a year she would see him, and then in addition some pictures and things like that. So that's practically, hey, we're going to under promise, and now how do we over deliver? So extra things we've done is FaceTiming or having more visits in person and things like that. What we didn't want to do is set the bar so high and then we break promises or we don't keep commitments. And I think realizing where a lot of these families and women are coming from specifically, there's so much brokenness and there potentially can be distrust of people, and we don't want to add to that. And so we really want to create a safe space where she knows and understanding it's going to take time for her to fully trust us. But hopefully when we under-promise and over-deliver and we're keeping our commitments and we don't quickly commit to things that we can't follow through on, we have reaped the benefit of her now trusting us in a way that is really special and beautiful.
And then I'd add one more thing on us navigating open adoption, which has been for initially when we started talking to her both before adoption and that first season right afterwards. then it was primarily Allie and her communicating. And what we realized, and I've started to have a core conviction about that, is that the guys need to step up and lead a lot of the conversations. They can play buffer in the midst of like highly emotional conversations, and to not abdicate any of that leadership. So I quickly started taking over communication between everybody, communication with the agency, setting a vision for everybody. I would kind of be the one that was, I don't want to say setting an agenda, but definitely kind of moderating all of our time together, and would say things like, hey, I don't know that that's an appropriate conversation for right now. Hey, I think that you should go and think about those things and us come back. I think you should put those feelings or thoughts in writing. And so less on the specifics, but more, I've just come to like a core conviction that oftentimes adoption, foster care can be viewed as this thing that is women are leading out in those conversations, and guys are just kind of along for the ride, and so they can be a little bit more passive and just say, oh, yeah, that sounds cool. And I just think that men need to step up and lead, both from a practical level than just now am I less engaged in some of those conversations, but have been heavily engaged in almost all the conversations. But also from a big picture level of just advocating for women, advocating for vulnerable children. Like oftentimes, if you go to an adoption room or seminar or something, then oftentimes there's overwhelming amount of women. And so I think that's been part of the process, has been just stepping up and leading and being actively engaged and encouraging other men to do the same.
We asked her, we just said, hey, what do you want him to call you? Mm-hmm. And her name's Dominique, and she said Dom Dom, and we were like, great. And we have continually been I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I felt very cared for that she will say, you are his mom. I'm not trying to take the role of his mom. You are his mom. I chose you, which can make me cry. I'm Dom Dom. You're a mom. And so I feel like people can be afraid of those conversations. What if I ask and she wants to be called something and I don't like it? And I would just say, one, unless it's completely ridiculous, and I don't even know what completely ridiculous would be, but I just think it doesn't cause insecurity in me to acknowledge that she is his mom and she birthed him, and I want to be respectful now in language that I refer to her as. And so I've had to ask her, hey, does birth mother offend you? Does first mom, is that offensive? And so really, I want to make sure we two articulate what her role is in a way that honors and gives her dignity and respect. So,
and I think, he's 3.5, so he's figuring all this stuff out, right? Like I think that my hope is that it just is organically we're introducing and explaining things as it goes along, and he'll just slowly start to understand in a way that's age appropriate. And so like we've explained to him that he has a brother, but he thinks that like our neighbor's kids are his brother and sister right now. He thinks anybody that is, this tall or shorter is his brother and sister. So he organically refers to him as his brother, but I don't know that he knows what that means. He calls his cousins his sisters, and he's just figuring out. And so we hope that over time that is just kind of normal, in the same way that like you hope to talk to your kids about sex, that it's not like a talk at 15 and you introduce a whole bunch of ideas for the very first time, or saying them that they've already been introduced to, but that you're just like talking their whole life, and it's just kind of normal. We hope the same thing when it comes to just relationship with his birth mom and all of those different dynamics, and what does adoption mean, every component of that. We just hope that we start by reading him books about adoption at 3, and he's just like staring into space right now while I'm reading him books. But that over time that it would just introduce different ideas and it not feel more surprising than it needs to. Like, it'll be different for sure. So I don't want to say, hey, that it's just not different, but that it is not at least surprising is the hope as we communicate with him.
He's funny, but he knows Dominica's birth mom. His brother is Easton, and it's funny that it actually comes up when he's not with us. And so when he was in a little Bible study and I picked him up and the teacher was like, he was talking about his brother? And I'm like, he has a brother. Yeah. Or he was talking about being adopted or birth, that he knows language, and it's more surprising for other people on the other end, which is really fun for us to just normalize it. And yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, so I think we've been intentional along the way, and so I'd say there's a couple of things. We have been intentional about just learning, and so that looks like from the movies that we watch to the books that we read to who I follow on Instagram, all the way to like we went to Memphis and went to the Civil Rights Museum and took Everett in there with us, and you like got him sitting on this like model bus of where Rosa Parks was, or we went to the Selma Bridge. And so I think there's just like a learning that for him right now is probably less him learning and more us continuing to learn. And so just an intentionality there. And then I would say just a lifestyle and different experiences that we have. And so that could be like one of our neighbors is African American, and so and they've been kind of like grandparents almost to Everett. They're older, and so like they went with us to his first barber experience, right, and kind of help us navigate that, and have continued to, not just like one time. And so I'd just say there's been like a lifestyle from like the school that we decided to have Everett in, then is much more reflective. And intentionally, we drive to a different community than we live in so that he can be surrounded by all kids, the same kind of culture. To Allie can kind of talk through just like a bunch of different decisions that we've made there. And then I would also say we have had to learn how to be, I'll use the words unoffendable, in just like from a whole wide variety of different people. And so both like people who are white people asking all sorts of questions that can get frustrating for the 100th time. So when you hear questions like, hey, where is he from? Or different things that I know, just extending grace to people that on hard days can frustrate her. Then you're just figuring out, okay, hey, you're just meeting people where they're at. All the way to like, we spent a lot of time in kind of African American community, and I would say a consensus is that there is appropriately just protecting him and wanting to make sure that he's engaged in his culture, but there's an assumption that we're not being intentional at all. And so like I went to go vote one time, and we went to go vote, and some lady kind of grabbed her and was just like, hey, you got to make sure that he's around his people. Like that's the first thing.
Physically grabbed me.
First thing that comes out of her mouth. Our child. She doesn't ask us any questions. Like that's just the like, and I would say that's pretty normal.
not grabbing.
Yeah, but for there to be, I would say I've asked a bunch of African American men just like for insight and wisdom, and it's within the first 5 minutes, and they're encouraging us in that direction. And it'd be easy for me to be like defensive and be like, you have no clue all the stuff that I've done. But I just listen and not get offended by assumptions of anybody on any side about the way that we're navigating that. And so I think that there's just a level of intentionality for us. And then I'd also add that at least in our situation, then that wasn't like a new idea that we were just starting, as much as like meaning that we were already intentionally engaging and learning about cross-cultural differences in our community and across the world. And so this has just accelerated some of that, but it wasn't something that we were getting introduced to and kind of starting from scratch as much as just like there's just more of an awareness now than there was before.
Yeah, I think the Memphis example or Selma, that whenever we go on trips, we're trying to be mindful of, okay, what are places we can go see? What are things that we can learn, visit? And so that's been really fun to look for things that we all can learn about our history and culture and things like that. And then we really want to have mirrors for our son that we recognize in our home. When he looks at us, we look different. And so how can we have normal interactions with people that reflect his skin tone? And so with him being Black, we intentionally have a biracial doctor for him to see, and we go to the barber, and we are the only white people in there, and his school is all Black, and we again are the only white people in that environment. And in the grocery store, our neighborhood is diverse, and so when we even go to a grocery store, he's going to bump into people that reflect him in a way that we can't. And so when we talked about, what would we say to people considering adopting outside of the race, it would be like, start now if you haven't already. Look where you live, look who you're going to be around, be informed of different cultures. And I think that'll help you raise your child if you are already informed and it's not like shocking every time that you bump into things. And so it's been good, and we know we have still a lot of things to learn. So
yeah, I think that there's nothing that we're not sharing with him, and at the same time he's 3, so he only understands so much. And so we've just tried to be intentional of always sharing with him, both like in relationship with his birth mom, but also as we just talk about when we're doing story time every single night, then I'll weave in stories of adoption just naturally. And so he's kind of in a season where at nighttime he wants me to read him a book and then make up some crazy story about monsters or about animals or something. And so it's just both having some books about adoption. That's not what we read every night, but it's just kind of normal, embedded into what we're reading. But then also stories, then just both like highlighting stories in the Bible that highlight adoption, but also in the midst of telling stories about all these other crazy things that he wants me to tell him stories about, then I'll bring up stories about his birth mom or his brother or something to just kind of organically weave that in, where hopefully it just feels normal, that he doesn't remember like me sitting down and explaining to him as much as he gets bowled in the ocean and all of a sudden he's able to articulate it without having had the talk, so to speak.
And also even being careful what books that we're putting in front of him. And so a lot of people gifted us adoption, like children books. And as I read through them, I mean, I hope none of y'all gave some of this to me, but I had to throw away a lot because I didn't want even anyone else getting it. And just the way that some adoption children's books present adoption, the way they even sometimes talk about God and his plan and different things, I think it can be confusing, or the way it can characterize the biological family. So like a bird just happens to fall out of the nest and the mama bird just flies away, and then here comes a kangaroo, and you're like, why would the mama bird just fly away? That's so confusing. And so I think even I recognize very quickly, oh man, anything that is not going to accurately depict the love that his birth mother has for him, I'm not going to read him. Or anything that could be confusing about God and his character, I'm not going to read to him. And so we may have to make up some stories. But what we don't want to do is lay a foundation of things that are not true. And so just because it's a cute picture book. So I would encourage families to be careful, because these kids are learning these stories and what kind of foundation that can lay.
Yeah, I mean, I think big picture, I want him to know that he's loved by both God and his family, and then I want him to have and feel that like confidence. And oftentimes there's lots of, I'll just say a majority of people who even grow up with biological parents and both parents are still intact, they don't walk away feeling that, both about God or their family, and so that's not unique about him being adopted. I just hope that about any kids, that they would know that to be true. Mm-hmm. And then to also have a safe place where he can process just like emotions and different things and be able to articulate those. And so I remember a guy that I'd spent a little bit of time just kind of discipling me, and he said his like desire for his kids were that they could accurately articulate their emotions. And so for him to just like have the maturity to say, hey, this is really hard, this makes me feel insecure, whatever those emotions are that I think come up with all of us, then in addition to knowing how much God loves him and that we love him, to have the tools to be able to articulate that, I think would be awesome. I wish I had those tools. I'm still learning how to do that, and so I have
to help him with feelings.
I'm bad at doing that as an adult. We joke that like, what are those like magnets that go on the side of the refrigerator? Like Allie would have to pull those out and say, which face is you today? Because I don't know. I have a hard time explaining that. I remember a good friend of mine who's on staff here. He's just like, hey, guys have more emotions than being tired, hungry, horny, and bored. Those aren't really emotions, and so you've got to be able to explain what you're feeling. And so that would be my like hope for him, somehow, some way, probably through her, not through me, that he'd have the maturity to be able to articulate those things.
And I think when he's 18, I echo what you, obviously, that he's loved by God and loved by his adoptive family and his biological family. And I hope that we can say to him that we did everything we could. And I think what I mean by that is that we didn't look for like comfort or ease in the process, that we were willing to be the only white people in environments, that we were willing to have really hard conversations, that we fought for peace and unity in our relationship with his biological family, that we were consistent and faithful to our commitments, to send updates, to make space for him to see his biological family, that we would love him well by doing everything we can, putting at times I think what the world would say, the easy path. And the blessing we've already experienced from that is the relationship we already have with his birth mother and his brother. And, I know it's not the 18 question, but the fact that she's come to follow Jesus now in a way that is so humbling and moving and incredible, and getting to see the woman that she is 3 years in compared to 3 years ago, we would have missed that. And so that's not everyone's story, but I'm hopeful and thankful that by the time he's 18 and he's leaving our home, that he would know we did everything to navigate adoption in a way that honors everyone involved and brings dignity and life and love to everyone, not just, yay, we got a child. So
I think it's amazing opportunity if you're considering foster or adoption. I would say go for it. I'll follow that up with do it in a wise way. And I think that everybody has a responsibility to be engaged in caring for the most vulnerable, and then discerning what is your responsibility in this season can look different for everybody. So I don't think it's an option to be engaged. That doesn't mean everybody needs to adopt or foster a kid in the next 6 months. And then I would say it's incredibly hard. I can't think of any families that I haven't met that there's not some sort of hard. I mean, family is hard, parenting is hard, and then you add in more complexity. And I remember a good friend just saying, hey, every adoption or foster story starts off with some form of trauma. So that's what you're starting off with. And then life happens and you add more to it. And so just knowing that it's hard. And then the other insight that I kind of already touched on is just like, I think that there is a need for men to step up. And so like that would, if I had insights, that's what I'd talk on for 30 minutes is just like, I think that there's a need for men to step up in the home, both in how typically you end up with having an unexpected pregnancy. So I'll start with that's where men can step up, but then also just on being actively engaged in the conversation on the other side with foster and adoption. That I think we've got lots of women. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. I think that they're doing or relatively doing the job of just being actively engaged. But
Careful, bud.
I think that there's an opportunity for men to step up all across the board, from like actually being engaged and then how they lead their family to just the networks and the way that they engage outside of kind of actually foster and adopt, into just like making it a priority with the way that they think about legislative choices, to their money, to all sorts of things. I just think that there's an opportunity for guys to lead. And so if you're asking for insights, that's where my soapbox would be for men to step up.
And I would say first and foremost that adopting a child does not fix anything. And so, if your marriage is not in a great place, please don't adopt right away. At our church, we have a ministry, Reengage, something like that. Like that, to love a child well, your first step may look like taking serious ground in your marriage. And then I would say if infertility, now it's a lot more part of our story. In the beginning, it wasn't. But adopting and then realizing infertility is part of our journey. We're now 5 years in and have not been able to get pregnant. And so I know firsthand that adopting a child does not fix the grief and hardship that is infertility. And so, again, if that's where you are, then there are ministries, Shiloh and other things, that you can make sure that you're doing well with the Lord in that arena before bringing in a child, because this child isn't meant to fix your infertility grief, and the child is not meant to fix your family and your marriage. And if you put them in that position, they're going to carry a weight that they were never meant to carry. And so I think that's really important. And then lastly, this idea of that we're somehow saving anyone. And I think insight into that is that we aren't Jesus, and these biological families are not Satan and the enemy that we're having to rescue a child from. And so we really need to humble ourselves and go into adoption with how can we best love and care for this biological family that is clearly in a broken place, afraid, hurting, abandoned, abused, neglected, whatever those things are. we have to see them, and we can't ignore and only look at, well, we're going to get a baby. It's just our hearts have to be fully wrapped around the idea that we're not rescuing this child. And if these women or biological families choose to parent, that should be celebrated. And so as much as anytime I meet with families now, as much as you can be reminded and hold loosely when you're going through the process, even when you're matched, even when you're getting to the hospital, which is the hardest thing, that this child is not yours until papers are signed. So anything that you're doing to claim a child before this child is yours could be coercion, it could be hurtful, it could be damaging. You really want to respect and honor these biological families the whole way through. So I can soapbox that for any one of all the things I would not recommend you do. But
yeah, that's right. Just one last insight is that there's often a lot of complexity. And so I think wading through that and just kind of understanding, and I don't think that there's like a cookie cutter answer or response, but also that there are like some broader themes that lead to foster or adoption, and so figuring out how to be intentional about all the way to things like economics and jobs and helping single parents, and there's just so many things. I want to be careful of like being too broad there, but I just think that there's broader things than just you as a family choosing foster or adoption, but how to be engaged and thoughtful and understand some of the broader narrative of what may cause some of these decisions, and it may surprise you. And so I think seeking to understand, researching, and then understand how you can be a good steward of other resources that you have to be thoughtful there. So.
Yeah, we love our adoption story as far as we've seen the Lord show up, and we've seen God use adoption to change us and refine us in a lot of areas that I didn't know we needed refining in. And we've seen him change biological mother. And some of our equally as exciting stories are women that we have walked alongside who have parented. And I get just as much joy now getting text pictures of moms with their now 6-year-old, their now 4-year-old, their now 2-year-old, their now 1-month-old. And it's so beautiful. And so I think as much as we think adoption is beautiful and wonderful, I think I have gotten just as much joy and excitement watching these women become moms and walk through hard stuff to get there. And now these beautiful children with their biological families is just as, if not more, incredible to me. So.